It's not bad.
Are you from there originally?
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Well, listen, man, thanks for taking the time to jump on a call with me. I really appreciate it. I know you're probably super busy, so we'll get right down to it. But I guess the best place to start is probably just for people that may not be familiar with OpenNode, just to kind of explain what it is and the kind of the position it has in the ecosystem.
Yeah, so OpenNode is the company that I work for. It's a Bitcoin payment processor. We are a company that helps other companies accept Bitcoin. And our goal was to bring the Lightning Network to every business that we can. And since we launched, we quickly focused on just bringing Bitcoin payments to every business that we can, and we try to be very supportive of the Bitcoin ecosystem. So we support every latest technology, Bag32, SegWit, the Lightning Network, obviously. And yeah, that's our main goal. We are a custodial platform, and we are also fully compliant. So there's some caveats there, because we have to comply with the U.S. regulation. We're a U.S. based company, so there's a lot of rules in place that we have to follow. So we have to have our merchants go through a KYC process.
Mm-hmm.
There's no KYC in our checkout, so that's just something that businesses using OpenNode have to go through. But after you go through that, it's a very straightforward process to get OpenNode integrated. We have plugins for Shopify, WooCommerce, PrestaShop, and a bunch of other things. And we also have an API that allows any developer to quickly start accepting Bitcoin payments. And a lot of Lightning apps are using our API because it's so easy. It's an easy way to start accepting Lightning payments and also doing Lightning payouts without having to maintain your own node and without having to maintain any, liquidity locked in Lightning channels or having to worry about any of that. So that's, a brief overview of what we do.
Right. Okay. That was a bit of a lot. So I guess I'll jump in right away because I know that this comes up on a lot of the panel discussions you've been on and podcasts and stuff. But just the distinction between OpenNode and BTC Pay Server, right? And I've heard you say that, you know, OpenNode is attempting to, be a partner with kind of larger blue chip mainstream household name sort of service providers, merchants, that sort of thing. And as a result, if those sort of merchants require a KYC solution to in order to partner up. And so the distinction is that you're kind of going after those sort of clientele, where something like BTC Pay Server is just someone who wants to basically be their own merchant entirely. Is that a proper
Right.
distinction?
Yeah, so one of our big focuses is bringing on large businesses onto the Bitcoin economy, and it's not that they want to go through KYC. It's just
Sure.
that it's better for them to have a partner that is compliant and that has a legal department that they can reach out to. And we because we are a VC funded company, we can't afford to do all of that. Whereas BTC Pay Server, it's a community project. It has a lot of developers working on it, but they do it on an open source basis. So the two projects are very different in that regard. But yeah, I think we are a solution that's better suited for larger businesses, just because they don't have to really understand what Bitcoin is and how it works and the infrastructure that has to be in place in order for you to accept Bitcoin payments. But BTC Pay Servers is a little bit more hands-on, but it's also a good solution if you want to set up and be your own payment processor and not have to worry about um, having someone process your payments and the privacy implications that has. So they're two different solutions. I guess they could be used for the same purpose, which is accepting Bitcoin payments, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think practically they end up being very, very different.
Right. And can you maybe outline for people, because you're not the first, Bitcoin payment processor. The one that's out there that most people know is BitPay, and kind of people love to hate BitPay for a number of different reasons. But maybe you can just detail the distinction between OpenNode and BitPay, and just how what you're doing is different.
Right. So for starters, we are a Bitcoin only company, and I think BitPay and I think every other payment processor in the crypto quote unquote space is multi-coin, so they accept a variety of coins. We are a Bitcoin only solution, so if you go to our checkout, there's no coin selection. There's the only one QR code, one Bitcoin address, and that's our first differentiation from every other player in the space.
Hmm.
The second one is that from day one we launched with Lightning Network support, with SegWit support. So we try to be good actors in the space. We try to open source as much work as we can to the space, and I think BitPay's fall began when they started, adopting and going for the Bcash way of doing things, and they never, came back to, the good side. So I think that's also a differentiation point, which is that, we try to be actual good participants in the network, even though we have to be compliant. But we try to do everything that we can to support the network. So we do a lot of internal work to support batching. So we try to batch as many transactions as we can, not to, pollute the blockchain with uh, hundreds, if not thousands, of transactions. So we try to batch them all up. So yeah, that's the main differences. In terms of, more business related things, we also have different pricing, but that's more of in the business side of things.
Yeah. So, what's the impact of KYC other than the time people have to take to do something like that, and the how it allows you to be regulatory compliant? But I noticed on your website that your ethos is like everybody should be able to accept Bitcoin and Lightning payments, and we don't discriminate against anybody no matter what they want to do. We're here for everybody. But in a politically charged environment, it's not difficult to conceive of a case in the future where maybe someone selling drugs or arms or something like that is using OpenNode. How does the fact that you're regulated impact how you might be leaned on in the future to deny service to customers?
Yeah, absolutely. With the regulation that's in place in the U.S. today, there's certainly some businesses that we wouldn't be able to serve. But there's a very nuanced distinction between so businesses can get excluded from traditional payment processors and while being fully legal. And that's a distinction that's very nuanced and it's hard to explain. But so there's what is in the law, and that is what you have to comply with. But there's also pressure that you get from credit card companies and pressure that you get from banking partners. And that's usually what ends up forcing companies to have to exclude businesses from, even though they're fully legal. So since we are a Bitcoin company, we have some more leeway when it comes to not having to worry about what is good for Visa and what is good for MasterCard and what they ask us to do, because we don't have those kinds of relationships in place that we have to maintain. But since we are compliant, there's certainly some businesses, especially from sanctioned countries, things like that, that we wouldn't be able to serve. But
Right.
other than that, we try to be, as open as we can within the confines of the law, and yeah, and we don't have to worry about maintaining all those relationships with that many intermediaries. Whereas PayPal, for example, they have to worry about all of that, and if a credit card company asks them to shut some business off, they have to in order to protect the rest of their business.
Right. So basically, just anybody is welcome as long as what they're doing is not illegal, right? Under the law
Right.
of the jurisdiction. But
Exactly. The U.S. jurisdiction in
the
this case. Yeah.
the other thing is that you guys have an automatic exchange to fiat service, right, as part of the platform. So to what
Yeah.
degree would those banking partners be able to pressure any sort of behavior or action from you guys?
Right. We haven't felt that just yet, but I'm sure, it will happen as we grow. So that's something we will have to deal with. But what we find is that banking partners in general, if they don't have, the credit card part of things, it's a much, much simpler system with many. fewer intermediaries. So I think that will help, but I think only time will tell uh, if that happens or when that happens.
Right. And is your guys' approach? I mean, do you see this as a long-term service that's integrated into the platform, like the automatic the option to automatically exchange to fiat, or is it just like, well, might as well offer it while we can, but maybe in the future we'll be, we won't be able to offer that for whatever reason?
Right. In the ideal world, I guess that when the pressure starts to come from the banking partners, the world is already fully hyper Bitcoinized, so we
Right.
don't have to worry about that. But yeah, the plan is to keep this service in place for as long as we can, since it's something that a lot of businesses, especially larger businesses, have to worry about because their bills are in fiat, they pay their employees in fiat, so it's something that they have to have in place. But in the future, we already see some demand for people wanting to keep a small percentage of their revenue in Bitcoin, so that's great. But in the future, we expect that percentage to keep growing and eventually to hit 100%. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So you guys have been operating for about a year, is that right?
Yeah, since May last year, so about a year and a half.
Yeah. And so, how's it going? How much uptake has there been? What's been the response from, merchant partners? How, just give me the rundown on how it's gone so far.
Yeah, we've been growing fairly quickly. So I'm not sure on the exact numbers, but we're growing at a very significant pace, even though we're a startup and that's expected. We're growing, I think, even above the startup average, which is already high to begin with. So we're seeing a lot of adoption. Obviously, we're still a small company, so you have to put those numbers into perspective. But we're seeing more and more companies starting to take us seriously and start really considering having Bitcoin payments. For some companies, that's not something they plan to have in the near or even medium term.
Hmm.
But some other companies are much more receptive to hear and discuss that because they see it as just another way of just another target audience that they can sell to, right? So if they can sell to a bigger audience and sell to more people and not have to worry about accounting implications, tax implications, and even Bitcoin liquidity implications, because if we sell the Bitcoin for them, they don't have to worry about that, then it's just a win-win for everyone, really.
Right.
So yeah.
And like, why did you end up getting involved in this project in particular? I've heard your story a little bit um, in previous podcasts, and you're saying that you had, I think, come across Bitcoin several years prior, and then really kind of started investigating it in 2016. A background in computers,
Software engineering, yeah,
software
computer
engineering,
science.
computer science,
Right.
and so what about this project kind of drew you in and you made you decide you wanted to work in it?
Well, there was never any decision really. It was really by chance. João, the CTO of OpenNode, just invited me to help uh, with the MVP. So the product that ended up being launched in May last year. And I just started helping as I did help many other projects outside of crypto space. I was a contractor, so that was kind of what I did. But I just went down the rabbit hole very quickly, and in the team of Bitcoiners and Bitcoin maximalists that are there to incentivize you and make you dive even deeper into the rabbit hole, I very quickly became obsessed with Bitcoin and became obsessed with bringing Bitcoin payments to everyone. So I never thought about, ever leaving and go do something else. I was kind of, yeah, this is the thing that I want to do for as long as I can.
Yeah, there's a lot of that sort of sentiment floating around these days. A few weeks ago, I wrote on Twitter that if you're not obsessed with Bitcoin, then you don't understand what Bitcoin is, and it seemed to resonate with a lot of people. The rabbit hole just never ends, and the more it draws you in, or the more you learn about it, the more it draws you in, and it's a fascinating time and a fascinating space. But you've done some stuff with Lightning just personally too, right? Are you Lightning Spin? Did you develop that?
Yeah, so yeah, while I was working for OpenNode, I kind of wanted to. So I was helping more with the front end side of things with which do interact with Bitcoin, but very minimally, right? You don't have to. So the backend is responsible for all the interaction with the actual Bitcoin full node and the Lightning node. So I kind of wanted to get my feet wet
Right.
and try out some Lightning stuff without having to worry about maintaining a payment processor in production, right? Because screwing up is very expensive
Sure.
in that setting. So I decided to try something out and try do a little project. And I specifically wanted to do something that allowed people to send money via Lightning, but also receive money via Lightning, so people can experience both sides of the equation, right? Because even though sending microtransactions is not a thing in the traditional payment processor with credit cards and stuff, um, that's very fun. But receiving money, if you think about it, it's much harder in the traditional setting, because as an individual, you can't accept credit cards, right? You can send money out, but it's very hard for you to accept money. And so I specifically wanted to do something that tackled both of those things.
Yeah.
So I thought about, yeah, let's try to do like a very simplified roulette and try to make it fun. And yeah, I just made Lightning Spin, which is exactly that. So it's a very simplified roulette. You can pay per spin. So the minimum wager at the time was 1,000 satoshis, and if you win, you can instantly withdraw your earnings. So that was my first project in the Lightning space.
Is that legal? I mean, because technically it's gambling, right?
Right. So that was one of the reasons that I quickly sold it, because I didn't want to, to have that uh, responsibility. But I think there's the company that is running it now has found ways to operate it within the confines of the law of the country they're operating in. So
Right.
there's definitely ways to make a casino like that or a game like that legal. But I just didn't have enough time to or resources to invest into figuring out all of that. It was really just a side project. And once it started, I was never expecting it to take off like it did, right? I was expecting people to try it out, make a couple spins, and then just never go back to it again. But it ended up doing hundreds of thousands of spins over the course of a few months. So it quickly became apparent for me that I needed to, sell it to someone that actually could run it.
Right.
Uh, yeah.
Do I don't know if you know. I mean, do things like that require a company? Because, like, let's just say you host it in a certain jurisdiction, a laissez-faire, or a kind of untraceable way, or at least in a jurisdiction that is not going to snoop around, and then you have the proceeds, go to an anonymous address somewhere. I mean, like, does something like that even need like a company structure around it, or can you just operate it as like a interface and that's it? Money goes in one side, comes out the other, and vice versa.
I guess you would need a company just to make sure it's actually legal. But if you wanted to hide it from the legal, setting, then yeah, I guess there could be ways to make it uh, uh, not legal, but to operate it in that way. But I think to make it be fully legal and actually something that you can take the earnings and actually use them in the real world without having to hide them, then you would have to be a company. But yeah, I'm not too sure.
It certainly, sheds some light on future, exam because with payment processors in the past, like if you had a gambling website like that and you didn't have a company around it, let's say, if you just money came in and then the payment processors handled that, as soon as the authorities found out, then they would just lean on the payment processors and it would be over. But we're rapidly going into a future and a time where, like, there's going to be all these, let's say, potentially revenue generating services that don't necessarily have to be tethered to a legal structure nor a payment processor that can be stopped. Now, that I'm not saying that's the case with OpenNode, but even if it's just a personal channel, for example, or some sort of mix of those things, like it seems like there's going to be it's going to be very difficult to stop such structured businesses in the future, or services or whatever.
Yeah, I think it might be hard to stop them or track them, but it's definitely still within the realm of possibility that police authorities or national, the government can still go after you and figure out who you are and what you're doing. So I would still tread carefully, even though it might look like Bitcoin is very anonymous. A lot of people got screwed up because they thought that was the case, but it turns out that it's not as anonymous as it thinks, and because you think it's anonymous, it makes you more prone to be less careful because, oh, this is anonymous, I can do whatever I want. But it turns out that's not the case, and even with Lightning, which gives you a lot more privacy, we still don't know what is possible if you have, a lot of nodes in the network and you do a lot of advanced analytics in the network. We still don't know what is possible, but we hope, our hope and my hope is that we get a lot more privacy with Lightning, but we still, I think we have to let that play out. So I wouldn't, do crazy things
Yeah, yeah.
with Bitcoin for now.
I was on Lightning Spin before we hopped on the call, and the default like bet amount is 10,000 satoshis, right? And I was just like, I guess I wasn't paying attention. And I only saw like there's a minimum and a maximum, and I guess I thought the default was the minimum, and then you could increase it to the maximum. So I went for a spin, and I lost, and so it was like I lost 10,000 satoshis, and then I realized that you could the minimum bet was actually 1,000, right? And in my mind, I was like, no, like, and I'm only using this
Yeah,
example to say how, that's less than a dollar, right? The 10,000 satoshis. And so, I spent a couple bucks on, espresso today, for example. But when it's in the form of Bitcoin or satoshis, I find such a more visceral desire to not
to
part from
save.
them.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
such a weird
exactly.
thing.
I think Bitcoin really teaches you how to save and be very mindful of the things you spend money on, and especially when the money is in Bitcoin already, it's very hard to part ways with it. But even regular fiat money, when you spend large quantities of it, or at least modest quantities of it, you at least I generally think, well, I could have spent all of this buying Bitcoin
Yeah,
instead. So
yeah. It
yeah, it
told.
really puts you in a weird state of mind where you're always thinking about saving and Bitcoin and how much you should have or how much you can stack. So it's fun.
The opportunity cost of your spending is now like super apparent and in your face once you get into Bitcoin. You're like, do I need that new shirt? Do I need those new sneakers? It's $100. I could put that $100 into Bitcoin. That $100 could be $1,000
Yeah.
in a few years or more. Yeah, so I think this is a very common theme that a lot of people that are in Bitcoin talk about, and I've talked about it a lot on the show, is just how it changes your behavior. You obviously lower time preference, and you scrutinize your purchases more. You try not to spend on things that are unnecessary, that sort of thing. Now, obviously, it's a generalization, but it seems to be pretty common.
Yeah, I think so because I guess this is the way it's supposed to be. So if you're spending your time and energy doing a job and getting a salary, I think you should be. It makes sense that you should be inclined to save that and not spend that on random things or things that will quickly vanish into not giving you pleasure or happiness anymore.
Yeah.
So I think this should be the default state. I don't know. I think the Keynesian way of doing economy just pressured everyone because, well, your money in 5 to 10 years will be worthless anyway, so might as well take some happiness out of having that money. So I think it just over the past 20, 30, maybe 40 years, everyone just this became the default mindset for everyone. So it's surprising for us that, well, now I think about saving, but I think it should be the default, and hopefully, once we hyper Bitcoinize the world, it will, for future generations, they will look back at us. Oh, these guys spent $13 on avocado toast. How insane is that? At the time, that bought 130,000 sats.
Yeah.
That is like the life savings of some people in the future. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. But it's definitely, I think it's a good mind state to be in. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense that, yeah, I'm spending my finite time, as Murad puts it. I'm spending this my time, which is the only finite thing that I'm sure I will only have this much of during my lifetime, and I'm spending it for things that are going away, or I'm keeping it in money that is slowly but surely depreciating. So I think Bitcoin gives you a way out and allows you to be in the correct state of thinking about saving.
Definitely. And you know, like Safedine in his book mentioned how the type of money that the culture uses influences behavior. But the funny thing is like most people that I know of, like no coiners or pre-coiners, we'll call them, right? They aren't really aware of how the monetary system works. They're not aware that over the last 20 years their purchasing power has gone. You know, the money's been inflated by 20%, 30%, 50% more. So it's interest. Like I'm curious about how the type of money that a society uses subconsciously changes behavior, right? Because people that I know that only use fiat, they're not like going around like, oh, I can't wait to get rid of my shitty fiat. Like they still want money and want to save for the future. It just seems that once you become aware of the quality of a fiat money versus the quality of a money like Bitcoin, then you become hyper aware of the upside of saving and the downsides of spending or overspending.
Right. So I think over time, even historically, there was always ways to save that would give you money over time. It wasn't opportunities like Bitcoin that are so disproportional in terms of upside. But if you invested your money in the S&P and if you invested your money in real estate, there were always ways of making your money work for you and really getting some savings going and having your savings work for you and generate more and more money. So I think historically that always happened. What I think Bitcoin gives you is the certainty that what you're investing in is actually, a finite resource and a very scarce resource, whereas every other thing you can invest in, it's really a gamble, right? Even if you invest in prime real estate, who knows if in 20 or 30 years that city will still be, the center of the world. It can very much, people get driven away because the prices just risen too much. So I think Bitcoin is the only thing that you can invest and have 100% certainty that there will only be 21 million Bitcoin. So the Bitcoin that I have now is a certain percentage of the total supply. So I think that helps, the mindset of saving. But I think historically there was always ways of thinking about saving that made sense. They just weren't as disproportionate as they are now. Maybe 50 years ago, investing in prime real estate in New York had this much upside. I don't know, but for us millennials and for people in this generation, there aren't such opportunities now. So you can invest in the S&P, but does that make sense to buy the top of the market right now?
Right.
That keeps going up and up, but it's never been this high. So maybe it doesn't make much sense, and maybe you should think about other things. And what other things can you think about? Because real estate is already, at the top of that market. So the only opportunity that really makes sense, at least in my perspective, is to think about something that is going to be a wealth transfer from, the boomers and the generations before ours, and to move money, because those people eventually will, get retired and eventually die. So the money has to flow somewhere, right? And if we can start a movement and a generation of people that already think digitally and think, they're internet native people, if they have a currency that works online and that works within this very defined mathematical limits, I think it just makes sense for the savings paradigm to shift very abruptly over the next 10 years. Yeah, I think. But yeah, I think that's the way people should think about savings.
I think that's very well put. And like everything, I think in hindsight, that what you just described will be like so plain to see, so obvious that people will be like, I can't believe I didn't see it. Like, yeah, what am I going to do? Buy the top of the market? Buy super expensive real estate? Jimmy Song made I think kind of back a calculation where he tracked the annualized growth of the S&P since, I don't know if it's since 1971 or even earlier back. and it was like 6 and something percent. And then he looked at the money supply growth of the US dollar annualized over the same period, and it was like 6 and a something percent, you know? So
Right.
as you said, you know, being involved in and owning a monetary asset that is ultimately will be infinitely scarce, and whose monetary policy and all that kind of stuff is set and unchangeable. Again, in hindsight, I mean, this is why we're all here, right? We could be totally wrong, but
Right. Yeah, I
if
think that is a possibility
yeah,
that
yeah,
we are completely wrong, but I
sure.
think it makes sense though.
Yeah, and I always I try to add in that caveat because of course it's possible. But if we're not wrong, then when this is studied in hindsight in 20, 30, 40 years, it's, you know, it's going to seem like how could anybody not have seen it?
Yeah, and I think also the traditional monetary policy and monetary system that we live in currently, it makes it so everyone needs to be an investor, right? So there are savings opportunities, but you have to go out and seek out and learn about what is the S&P and what are stocks and what are ETFs and what real estate should I buy? Should I buy New York? Should I buy,
Right.
someplace in Canada, LA, SF? You really have to turn yourself into an investor. And as we, evolved for the past maybe thousands of years to become very, very specialized, and every person becomes specialized and they do one thing and they do it well. And the human race became very, prosperous doing exactly that. It's very backwards that now you're expecting every person that's specialized in being good in this one thing also have to learn about investing and about, the places that they have to put their hard-earned money in.
It's
So Bitcoin really yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, especially now. I mean, we got negative interest rates all over the world. So
Right.
before, you might have just said, "Bah, whatever, put my money in the bank. I get 2% interest, adjusted for inflation. Maybe I break even. You know, whatever. I don't need to be an investor." But
Right.
now it's like if you don't know how to manage your money, you're going to be losing it on an annual basis, and it evaporates quickly. You know, as the years pile up.
Yeah, absolutely. So that, yeah, right now, yeah, you're for sure right, because right now you don't really have any other option. You're either losing money or you're losing money, or you have to go ahead and figure out some crazy way to buy the top of the market and not get wrecked, which I find that very hard to believe. So yeah, I think Bitcoin just gives you a way of doing or investing and doing savings without having to learn any, things that you're not supposed to learn. You should leave investing for the people that actually do that for a living. So hedge funds, family funds, and investors of that sort, they actually are good at that, and they're good at, analyzing the up and downside of the companies, and they've invested their whole lives in learning that, right?
Yeah,
So you shouldn't be expecting to go out in the markets and compete against those people, because you're surely going to lose.
for sure.
So Bitcoin, I think, levels the playing field and gives everyone the opportunity to save without having to be experts at anything, but working their regular jobs and putting that money aside and just not spending it. And I think that's a reasonable request.
Totally.
Whereas being an investment professional is not really a reasonable thing to expect of people.
Especially in the current climate where, you know, being an investment professional in this kind of system that's become so perverted. Like, I've had some people on the show where, you know, they're in their previous career, like their they had people in their company whose sole purpose was to interpret what it meant when Janet Yellen wore a blue blazer instead of a red blazer, because that was going to inform investment decisions that the firm made. And you're like, this is the fucking Twilight Zone. Like, what the fuck is wrong with people thinking in this way? But the system is predicated on, well, it's predicated on what it is, and that creates so many perversions at every level, which makes it even more daunting for your average person to say, like, well, what the hell do I do with my money when that dude over there is looking at the colors of the jacket to determine investment decisions, you know?
Yeah.
So I agree that Bitcoin is this thing that's come along, and not only does it have fundamentals that are easy to understand once you have a basic understanding of, you know, what money is and the historical context of monetary policy, but it just like makes sense. It's like, oh, a type of money that nobody can fuck with, that can't be censored, that can't be confiscated, that can't be inflated away by one central authority, yeah, that makes sense to me. Oh, and it's good for, transacting on the internet, and there's microtransactions and all, like it's going to be internet native. Yeah, sure, that seems like a good fit.
Yeah. Yeah, we spent the last, few minutes just discussing one very specific aspect of Bitcoin. It obviously has a lot more things going for it. So yeah, I guess that goes to show that is just, the savings aspect of Bitcoin is just the thing that, we're talking about now, but it certainly has a lot of other utilities.
Yeah.
And I think being internet native and being a global currency will just make so much sense for people that were born and raised doing, internet payments and just transacting online more than they transact in person even. I think it will quickly become apparent, and as the world becomes more and more actually global, you're transacting with people all over the world, it will just make more and more sense, even though, even if you disregard the savings aspect of it, just the fact that you can have one asset that you can trade globally and that acts as money, that you can use that asset to trade with other people for goods and services.
Yeah.
That alone is already so valuable that I think Bitcoin has so many things going for it that it has to win eventually. And it will probably take a long time, and we probably need the market to achieve a much, much higher level of liquidity. So we don't experience things that what happened yesterday, that the price dropped 15% or so in less than 24 hours. And I think that is unreasonable to ask people to have savings in an asset so volatile as that. But I think eventually with time and with the halvings coming in and just being less and less severe and less impactful in the price, and there's more liquidity in services like Backed that allow for institutional investment. I think that will, bring the liquidity up to a level that things like that won't happen anymore, and we can start expecting people to migrate their savings and even personal money over to Bitcoin.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right, but I also think it may be the case that, give Bitcoin a few more years, and if things keep progressing as they have, kind of stagnate, boom, bust, stagnate, boom, bust, that sort of cycle. I mean, I think a lot of people will say, well, do I care if it dropped 20% in a day? I mean, these are 2, 3, 5 year, savings deposits effectively that I'm making, and the 5-year chart looks pretty damn sweet. So, you do whatever the hell you want on a daily basis.
Right, but I think it will always be very hard to stomach a 20% drop, especially if you're counting on that money for something that you have to do, and all of a sudden, if you have,
If it's a daily
some
spending
money,
thing, sure.
right, or even if it's like your emergency fund, do you want to keep that in fiat? I think once we reach a certain level that the volatility is so low that you can have your emergency fund in Bitcoin, and just making sure that the funds you have aside for emergencies are not being inflated away, and you have to keep on adding more money into your emergency fund. I would like to live in a world like that you can keep your funds that that you might have to use in the near term. If you can keep those in Bitcoin, that's the world that I envision in the next 10 to 20 years. But yeah, for now, it's really just for long-term savings, and you have to be able to not touch that Bitcoin for 5 to 10 years to make sure that, if drops happen, you have enough time that the market can build itself back up.
Yeah. It'll be really interesting to see how like the Bitcoin generation reacts, so people that kind of, the generation now of 10-year-olds, and in the next few years, like, 12, 13, 14-year-olds who come into the world in an economic sense, transacting online most likely, like you said, who look out at the landscape and they're like, my options are this Bitcoin thing and the infrastructure built on top of it, or PayPal, or my bank, like, because we kind of accept it because we come from that world. That's always the interesting thing about change, right? Like, even though we think it's horrible and shit, an element within us accepts it because it's what we've always done. Like, oh man, I've made international transfers recently and stuff like that, and they take days. Obviously, they cost $40 for the fee, and then they take a forex spread, and by the end of it, like let's say it's 10,000 euros, you've lost 300, 400, 500 euros, and that's with like a good service like TransferWise or something like that, and through no fault of their own, but like maybe your bank charges an incoming fee and all this nonsense. Right. And I just feel like, a generation who starts out with those two options, of course they're never going to choose the legacy option. They're going to, and I think that will really, that's how change occurs, I guess, that people just end up seeing when they have those two options available. They're like, there's no chance I would ever use the legacy one unless I'm absolutely forced to. And there's a much less of an appetite or tolerance for the shittier option, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been working for the past 5 years as a contractor and remote worker based in Portugal, and I've never worked for a Portuguese company, right? So I always have issues with my bank not accepting international wire transfers for a variety of reasons, or even when they do accept it, there's crazy, maybe they just charge a couple of euros for the transaction, but then they use a completely outrageous foreign exchange, like an exchange rate that's completely outrageous. And so it's like an hidden fee. I've had situations where I had to actually go to my bank and ask them to fill out this very complicated document so a company could give that document to their bank, so they knew how to route payments to my bank. And that's, for someone that was born in the internet age where you can, instantly communicate with every single person in the world by just, taking your cell phone and just sending a text message, which is, ancient technology by now. Right. But even that worked fairly well, maybe 20 years ago. So for someone that lives in this generation, the bank system is so, outdated, and it works so backwards that it's very hard to accept that. And even credit cards, which work fairly well for people living in, developed countries, credit cards work fairly well, and I can, be reasonably sure that I can use my credit card to buy online. But it happened to me on numerous occasions that I go to the US for a conference or for, something, or just to visit, and I have a couple of cards and none of my cards work. Then I have to go out and get cash, and to get cash, my bank charged me like a $10 fee, and then the ATM charges me a $5 fee. So it still doesn't work as well as it seems. And when it works, it seems to be very straightforward, but there's actually a very complicated payment system and payment network with dozens of companies trading within each other, with each other, and then banks trading with each other, and then balances and central banks kept for all this to happen. So if we have a way to transact globally without needing all of this complicated system, that obviously all this complexity is charged to the customer or to the merchant, right?
Yeah.
So if we have a way to avoid all of that and minimize the fees that merchants and customers pay, and create a global payment system, I think it will be a no-brainer for everyone, really.
And jumping through all these hoops to like draw money, make payments when you're traveling, receive your salary, etc., are made even worse now, especially for someone like you who's like deep into the Bitcoin industry, knowing that, you've got this device in your pocket that could do all of this in like a matter of seconds, and you've got to go through this infrastructure where every institution that touches it has to take the time and take their profit, their take from your transaction. When I was in Laos a couple of weeks ago, and I was getting Lao Kip, the currency there, and I was at a Western Union kiosk, and first of all, the person in front of me was receiving, I think, like a couple $100 from a transfer. And I was there for 15 minutes. He was signing papers. They were stamping this and that and giving to him. And then I looked at the fee chart, and to send $100 through Western Union or to receive it, the fee is 15% excluding foreign exchange fees. 15%. I mean, it's like, and the people using those,
it's insane.
Yeah, it's crazy. And the people using those services in countries like that, who may not have bank accounts or banking infrastructure that can provide those services, like they're totally at the mercy of that stuff. I know a lot is made of like remittances and Bitcoin and stuff, and I don't know how much it's actually been used for that at this point, but man, it certainly seems like a market that's ripe for a new way of doing things.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think with all the trouble that I go to with credit cards and banks, that still doesn't compare with living in a country that actually doesn't have a proper banking system, or at least one that can interact with every other country's banks. Even if it's troublesome, at least it's possible here in Portugal. Whereas for a lot of countries, that is not even a possibility. So they have to go through people like Western Union and pay outrageous fees and things like that. And I think, Bitcoin remittances are certainly a possibility, but it's still hard for those people to receive the Bitcoin because then in their own country, they will have to transact,
Right.
in their own currency. But I think, there are a lot of people already using Bitcoin for that, even if they have to go to a local exchange or to their, local Bitcoin person to sell the Bitcoin that they just got from a relative or from friends. Um, Even that should be much, much cheaper. No local exchange should be charging you 15%, right? So you have that going on for Bitcoin remittances. But if more and more people start accepting Bitcoin and we start having a circular Bitcoin economy, then you can easily, achieve the goal of unbanking or banking the unbanked with just having Bitcoin being sent, and then they can spend the Bitcoin locally, and then the people that they spend the Bitcoin with can pay their suppliers with Bitcoin. So eventually you will reach a world that doesn't need any intermediaries that just do basic things such as sending money back and forth.
Yeah, I totally agree. And on a kind of a somewhat unrelated point, but just it made me, what you were saying made me think of it, is like, it's also these countries that have really weak currencies and that are basically, at the mercy of the countries with the stronger currencies and the banking infrastructure and the policy making power and all that kind of stuff. I mean, some place like Laos, like it's going to be darn hard for them to break out of the economic situation they're in, because everything is stacked against them. And these days there's lots of discussion about trade wars and whether globalization is good or bad, and there's lots of disruptive forces happening, I know. But I just think, like, again, if we're going to use that hindsight lens and like what will people say in 30 years, like trying to have a globalized world economy with hundreds of different currencies, I think is going to seem like idiotic. Like, how could you have a truly globalized world with free trade when every single issuer of currency, every single government can manipulate that currency, in secret or in public? Like, of course you need a standard global currency to have smoothness of operation and trade. Kind of like the example that's often noted, like 1870 to 1914, when the gold standard kind of pervaded throughout the world.
Yeah, I think what Bitcoin gives us that, and the fact that we have this many currencies is just a byproduct of every country looking at, well, if I can't print my own money, if I can't have this flexibility to completely control where the money goes and what happens to the money and create more money for myself as a government, if you have that opportunity, then of course you're going to take it, right?
Yeah.
So if every country does that, then we end up in a situation where we have hundreds of currencies, and then we have one major currency, which is the world's reserve currency, and every other currency is dependent on that one. So it's a really complicated situation, and it's easy to get out of if you look at situation or of options such as Bitcoin. But it will take time because obviously the government doesn't want to give away the opportunity that they have right now to uh, have this much flexibility with their own money. So we'll see what happens, but it's certainly very backwards that I can instantly send a message to anyone in any country, and we can be having this conversation, a video chat from, Portugal to Thailand. So it's crazy that if I want to send money to you, I can have this conversation with you, but if I want to transfer value to you or transfer money to you, there's really no, if you don't look at Bitcoin, there's really no option that is not extremely convoluted and doesn't require me to have all your banking information and maybe even your address, your phone number, your email. There's really no good way of doing it because, there needs to be some kind of way to transfer the money that I use here to the money that you use over there because they're different kinds of money. Even though they serve exactly the same purpose, they end up being different. So there needs to be someone that goes ahead and convert the value, that I have here with the value that you're supposed to receive there. So
Yeah.
I think if we have something like Bitcoin, we can't avoid all of that, and especially we can take that power away from the government, which historically, no fiat currency has survived more than a few dozen decades, a few decades. Um, so historically, things are not going to end well, and all your life savings, if you keep them in fiat, they're probably going to vanish eventually. So if we have an alternative, it's certainly more than welcome.
Preach, brother, preach. But on that, on another related point, just for people that aren't from, back to OpenNode for a second, for people that aren't that familiar with Lightning, can you just discuss a little bit about how kind of potentially like a revolution in payments and selling things, whether they're creative content or physical objects or whatever, the fact that Lightning allows for payments on at such a low fee and in such small denominations that this is really kind of opening up, tremendous amount of possibilities for monetizing pretty much anything, or at least a lot more than in the past.
Right. So I think there's two ways to look at this. So the first one is that, yeah, Lightning does allow you to do very, very small payments like sub US dollar cent payments and settle those instantly over the Lightning Network. So you can send 1 Satoshi to anyone that's on the Lightning Network and has the capacity to receive it instantly, and that will settle instantly. So there are no confirmations, there's nothing like that. So that's really cool, and that's probably going to open up a lot of possibilities, ways of doing payments that are not even conceivable right now, just because the technology didn't exist yet. And people talk about things such as streaming payments, and I don't know how much sense that makes, or how people will turn that into a thing that's actually usable. But for a simplified example, let's think about Netflix. Instead of paying your monthly subscription, maybe you can just stream payments while you're watching a TV show, and when you close your browser, you close your Netflix player, you stop paying, right? So this is a simple example. It's obviously the subscription model gives Netflix a lot of other advantages that are not, as apparent, or as, they have this monthly income that they are certain that comes in. So in the business side of things, there might be some other challenges, but technically it would be possible to do something like that where you're streaming payments while you're watching. And maybe for Netflix, it doesn't make sense for them as a business, but I'm sure there will be a lot of other business ideas that thrive with this streaming payments model. But I think another way to look at Lightning is that the base chain right now is very, very cheap to transact in. And I think this might be an unpopular opinion, but I think as more and more halvings happen, and as less and less Bitcoin is being actually mined, the transaction fees are going to go up, because it's very valuable to be transacting in the base layer, right, in the base chain. Having a final UTXO confirmed and deep into the Bitcoin's blockchain, that's something that, if you think about it, you're having a final settlement of value of currency in the world's premier store of value, right? So that shouldn't cost you 5 cents or 10 cents, right? So it's reasonable for me that the base chain gets more and more expensive, and I think right now we have disproportionate prices for the amount of value we're getting out of base chain transactions. So how Lightning fixes this is that for every base chain transaction, you now get the possibility of that corresponding to hundreds, if not thousands, or hundreds of thousands. There's no limit really to one UTXO corresponding to hundreds of thousands or millions of transactions on Lightning. So Lightning just spreads the cost of that on-chain transaction, which might eventually and will probably eventually get very expensive. But if you can do millions of transactions for the cost of a very expensive on-chain transaction, then you can actually do commerce with Bitcoin, even if the base chain gets very expensive, as it did already in 2017, and as it will probably get in the future. Lightning just gives you the possibility to continue transacting on Bitcoin, even though you're not on the base chain, and that has its own trade-offs. But it gives you the possibility to start trading with Bitcoin and start doing payments with Bitcoin, which was something that was touted back in the early Bitcoin days. But then the conversation moved more and more into savings, which is right now where Bitcoin makes the most sense as a vehicle for savings and for investing value. But Lightning gives us a possibility to start working for a world where Bitcoin is actually used for day-to-day payments. So I think that's a very exciting future that we can build using Lightning. And obviously, it's still very early, and Lightning is not ready to onboard millions and millions of people. There are still many technical challenges and especially many UX or user experience challenges, and everyone's in the space is working very hard to overcome those challenges. And the people actually working on the protocol are, constantly improving the Lightning nodes and improving the protocol and coming up with all kinds of proposals to improve the protocol itself. And companies like ours, which build on top of this Lightning protocol, are trying very hard to improve the user experience and try to think about ways of making the onboarding process onto the Lightning network very easy. But we're certainly not at an ideal point to onboard millions of people. But I think now with Lightning, we can see light at the end of the tunnel, whereas with base chain alone, everyone, could envision a future where the base chain was just too expensive for day-to-day payments. So Bitcoin is just going to be used for savings, and that's already, very, very valuable. But payments were out of the picture.
Yeah, it really seems like Lightning is bringing the quote unquote Internet of Money dynamic to Bitcoin. Because as you said, a couple of years ago, it was easy maybe to get discouraged and think like, well, this thing is so clogged up. How's it ever going to fulfill the function of all these, things that have been talked about? But I really feel, and I need to learn more about Lightning and become more familiar and experienced with it from a user point of view. But it really seems like there's a lot of momentum. I mean, it's only obviously less than 2 years old, but it seems like there's lots of momentum coming. There's people building on top of it and really starting to explore the possibilities. But I think it's becoming apparent that there is going to be a lot of possibilities with it.
Yeah, there are a lot of people working in the space, from companies working in the actual protocol to companies working in Lightning wallets to companies like ours working on just a Lightning payment processor to just regular developers, people just doing side projects and building Lightning apps to experience new kinds of payment models and new kinds of doing ways of doing microtransactions online and what advantages that can give you, and the streaming of payments that we've discussed earlier. So there's a lot of work being put into it, but for the regular Bitcoin user, it's still an entirely different thing that you need to learn, because even if you spend, a couple of years learning, okay, I know what an address is, I know what the private key is, I know how to store my Bitcoin, I know how to send it, I know, mostly how it works, and I can get, my work done, and I can send payments and receive payments, and I know how it works. Right now, if you look at Lightning, there's a whole another set of problems and things that you need to learn. You need to learn what a node is, what a channel is, how the channel balancing works, and if you have money in a channel, it might not be, in the direction that you need it to be. So there's still a lot of things that the regular user can't be expected to learn. So it needs to be abstracted away from the user, and there's a lot of work being done in that particular problem to fix that particular problem. But I think, it's just been, as you said, it's just been not even 2 years since the mainnet Lightning um, began. So that is everyone did a significant progress in those 2 years, and I think if you look at it and give it another 5 to 10 years, you will really start seeing the byproduct of all these intellectual talent working to fix all of these problems and to make payments better and better on Bitcoin. That will start to show. It just won't be immediate as people, maybe some people want it to be, but
Yeah.
with time it will come for sure.
Sure. I'm looking forward to the book by Andreas and company about Lightning late next year because, yeah, it should, he's usually pretty good at explaining those complicated topics. But one of the things I can't, well, I don't know what the solution is going to be. I guess nobody does at this point. But in most jurisdictions, spending Bitcoin, you create a tax event, right? Because technically you have to pay tax on capital gains. But when we get to such a granular level, when the Lightning Network is the predominant way where people are spending, and maybe even in a capacity like you described, like a streaming capacity, micropayments, that kind of thing. I mean, maybe that'll all just be automated. So if regulations don't change and they stay that way, because that's another reason why people don't spend Bitcoin, right? It's not just because they want to keep it as an investment for the next 10 years. It's also a big liability, or a big pain in the ass to spend it. And so either those regulations change or somehow this is abstracted away. It's done automatically when using the Lightning Network. But is that something that you ever consider?
Yeah, so I think that is also a twofold thing. So on one hand, you have a lot of good work being done, lobbying the government and explaining all these things to the government, and explaining to them how backwards it is that every single Bitcoin transaction creates a taxable event.
Right.
And obviously, this is in the U.S. Jurisdiction. I'm not sure if it's that way all over the world, but you have Coin Center, for example, doing an amazing job making these things clearer to the government. So eventually, I think they will get it, and they will work to change the regulation. But if they don't, I'm sure someone will create a software solution that just creates your tax, at least your Bitcoin tax returns for the year, and you can send 100 pages tax return to the government and let them deal with that. And I think eventually, with all that pain, they will learn that maybe it's better if we rethink this. It's not really worth it to be analyzing millions of pages of 1 cent, 1 Satoshi transactions. But we'll see. I think it's a very fixable problem, and it shouldn't be a deal breaker. It's obviously an obstacle for now if you're looking to spend Bitcoin, but you just think about, well, next year I will have to remember this and file all these paperwork. But if that becomes a problem, a real problem for a lot of people, there will be money in solving that problem, and someone will certainly make money and create a software solution that fixes that. So I think eventually, it just hasn't been such a big problem for now. But I think eventually, if it becomes that much of a nuisance, someone will for sure fix it.
I like that idea of making it as easy as possible for the user, but creating the most tedious amount of data imaginable for like every year for your tax return, just as a bit of a middle finger to the fine people.
Yeah, I
in
mean,
those departments.
if that's what they ask of you, you're just complying with exactly what you've been asked. And I think it will just become apparent how backwards that requirement is. Because if you're just complying with it and that creates an unreasonable amount of paperwork, then it's not really your fault. Because you didn't make the rules, right? So yeah.
Didn't Portugal just change their crypto to crypto laws? Is that Portugal, or was it Spain?
It was Portugal, and there were a lot of news outlets reporting on that. I haven't researched that a lot, so this is certainly not legal advice. But I think that news is very, very old, and there are a lot of so that referred to VAT. So what in the US would probably be something like the sales tax. I'm not exactly sure if those are equivalent, but it would be something like that. So the law that was passed just stated that you don't have to pay VAT, so value added tax, when you're selling Bitcoin. But I'm not exactly sure if it applies to all kinds of capital gains and all kinds of added value that you're getting, versus with the Bitcoin versus Euro trade. I'm not 100% sure that it applies to all kinds of, it completely eradicates all kinds of tax implications, but it's certainly a good start. And it's good that the government, it's at least acknowledging that there's this new kind of transaction that we have to address, and that it has no legal setting right now, and it should have. So we will clarify exactly on the legal grounds of Bitcoin transactions. So I
Right.
think it's a good start, but I'm not sure if it was a blanket statement for all kinds of tax. I can't speak to that.
Okay. Last question before we get into the rapid fire portion. But how did the Draper investment come around? Were you guys like pitching for that, or did they approach you, or can you speak to any of that?
Yeah, so I'm a software engineer at OpenNode, so I'm not very involved in the investment process. But I think what happened was that we were pitching a lot of investors, and we saw a lot of interest in investors being a part of our mission and being invested in our company. Uh, and eventually, we reached out to them and we set up some meetings, and the team met Tim Draper in person, and then we just went back and forth with this team until a deal was actually finalized. But yeah, I think it just happened with a lot of back and forth and a lot of pitching to a lot of different companies, and eventually we ended up pitching Draper and his team, and they liked the mission, and they decided to go ahead and set up a deal with us.
Sweet, sweet. Okay, so this next section is a bunch of questions, one after the other. You can answer however long as you like. You can say pass if you don't have any particular answer, and then at the end we'll just do a couple word associations. You good to go?
Yeah, sure, let's go.
All right. So, what is money? How do you define money?
I think money is the transfer of value and the storage of value over time.
If you had to explain Bitcoin to your grandmother, elderly person, what would you say, or what do you usually say?
Well, Bitcoin would be a way for you to save money without being subject to anyone's regulation, anyone's laws, or anyone's wills. It's just a way that you can save money, keep it there, and use it when you want without being subject to any externalities.
What is the primary reason why Bitcoin is important or interesting to you?
Is revolutionizing money, and for me to be involved in the biggest wealth transfer that there ever existed, from going from regular fiat money to taking money away from the government, that's what excites me in doing Bitcoin.
What does the sovereign individual mean to you?
Sovereign individual is someone that can make their own decisions without being subject to any third party externalities. The government, their friends, their family, they can make their own decisions and take those decisions to their fullest extent without being, subject to anyone's wills.
How long after you first heard of Bitcoin did you start learning more about it? And if you're comfortable saying, purchase it?
Well, maybe 2 years, I would say.
What has been your most effective method of educating people about Bitcoin in conversation or more formally?
I think the most it's if you go about explaining Bitcoin by explaining that if people keep their money in fiat in less than 20 years, half of that money will be technically gone, and there's a solution for that. That is a very convincing argument.
And have you used that argument on people before?
Before Bitcoin,
No, I mean, like,
oh,
have you used that
in
argument
Bitcoin, yeah,
successfully?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's. I think it's very successful if you explain to people that they're keeping their life savings and they're planning to maybe in 10 years buy a house. And if you explain to them that actually in 10 years, a house is probably going to be 25% to 50% more expensive, and all those savings will be worth 25% less, then that's a very convincing argument for investment in general. But then if you pitch Bitcoin alongside with that, I think that's a very convincing argument.
Yeah. What movie or song is most related to Bitcoin in your opinion?
Recently in the Baltic Connie Badger, Tatiana Moroz sang Bob Dylan's Master of War, and I
Nice.
think that resonated a lot with people. So I would
Nice.
go with that.
Was that a song you were familiar with before?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I love Bob Dylan.
Me too, man. All time favorite. Um, Further to that, any clip or rant from a movie that is your favorite?
From a movie, oh, I love the classic Pulp Fiction scene. It has nothing to do with Bitcoin, but it's just a classic that I love.
Can Bitcoin be stopped? If so, what is Bitcoin's biggest vulnerability? If not, why not?
I think I'm not sure if Bitcoin can be stopped. I'm pretty sure it cannot. But I think its biggest threat right now is if the government decides to go all out and do its best effort to eliminate it. I think they would have a decent chance at damaging it very much. So whether that is by being very strict and banning in and off ramps, or even outlawing Bitcoin completely, or doing full out investing billions of dollars into mining and doing selfish mining, or just using mining to completely disrupt the network. I think they would have a good chance of doing that.
What was your most recent aha or level up in your understanding of Bitcoin?
I think the Lightning Network was what really made me, go deep into the rabbit hole, because now I can use the command line to instantly send a payment in and out, settled instantly, one Satoshi. I think that was a really aha moment for me, because it really allows me to see practical effects of this technology, and how that is trustless, and I don't need anyone's permission, or I don't need to sign up for any service. I think, yeah, that was it for me.
And that actually makes me think of, I mean, I'm not, that actually makes me think of the offer that was declined by OpenNode by, Roger
Roger
Ver
Ver. Yeah.
for, because you're mentioning, because the narrative has been shifting lately to the use case of Bitcoin being for savings, right? But the Lightning Network is obviously coming back and saying like, no, the narrative that it can be peer-to-peer payments is gonna, the Lightning Network is gonna bring that back again. And just wanted to let the listeners know that OpenNode turned down I think it was $1.25 million offer
Yeah. $1.25
to accept Bitcoin
million.
Cash
Yeah.
on your platform.
Yeah, yeah, we did turn that down, and it just was the thing that made sense from day one. Our mission was we're going to be a Bitcoin only company, and it makes sense for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, we don't want to accept scam coins, so we want our users to know what they're getting into, and our merchants to not be accepting currencies or cryptocurrencies that will eventually jeopardize them because they're turn out to be illegal, or they turn out to be, a security or something. So we want to keep that risk off from our users. We want to support the Bitcoin economy and the Bitcoin only. We're very pro Bitcoin only, and we like companies that are more and more starting to appear that are also Bitcoin only. And lastly, because it doesn't make sense for you to turn Bitcoin into payments by ruining the properties that make it Bitcoin in the first place, right?
Right.
Because you can easily make Bitcoin into payments by just making the blocks larger, but then you're getting rid of you're centralizing the network, because you're not allowing everyone to run their own node. And if you decentralize the network, then you're losing all other properties of being trustless and being, and making sure that there's so many people following the rules that it's impossible to change the rules. So if you centralize the network, then you're also losing the certainty that the rules won't change, and that there will only be 21 million Bitcoin. So you're essentially getting rid of everything that makes Bitcoin what it is. So it's kind of a trade-off that doesn't make much sense to me
Yeah,
personally.
it's difficult for me to comprehend why that narrative or approach still persists. But anyways, I'm sure time will take care of that. What do you think will be Bitcoin's biggest impact on society?
I think a generational wealth transfer that will be very, very impactful, and I'm not sure the full extent that of the things that will cause, but also make people think and lower their time preferences. I think that will be a very good thing that Bitcoin will cause for sure.
When, if ever, do you think the first central bank will start adding Bitcoin to their reserves, and will they exist in 20 years?
I think they already did, probably. I'm pretty sure that some bank in some country has already started stacking sats. Uh, if central banks will exist in 20 years, I'm not exactly sure, but I think custodial solutions, which would essentially be kind of banks, will exist at least for the next few years while we transition to this new system. And maybe in the new system, there will be the need for financial services. So lending and borrowing will they are the basis of how we do trading with human beings. So the actual economy, even if you disregard the fiat part of it, needs lending and borrowing to happen, and that needs someone to build that infrastructure. So I think, yeah, some sort of banking system and lending and borrowing will exist in the future.
What's the biggest mistake you've made with Bitcoin?
Not buying early enough and not buying enough Bitcoin.
Almost always the answer, or spending too much early on.
Yeah.
How do you feel about Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin's creator, being anonymous and the coins that he likely controls?
Well, I think if you were to sell those, you would already have. So the amount of wealth that is in those coins is already life changing for anyone. Well, it's been life changing, but it's now like you would be one of the richest people in the world. So if he didn't sell those now, if he didn't touch those until this moment, I'm pretty sure that he never will. It's very clear what the intent was, and the fact that he stayed anonymous and no one knows who he is. I think that just goes to show that this was very much an intentional thing. It was not left to chance.
Yeah. What have you learned about yourself, or how have you changed, if at all, as a result of learning about and interacting with Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think the most dramatic shift was the way I think about money, and the way I look at the world, and the way I look at especially my own personal savings and the things I actually spend my money on. And I'm much more conscious of the things that I do with the money that I have.
Yeah. Have you ever purchased other coins? And if so, are you likely to do so again in the future?
I have purchased other coins, and it's fun. It's funny. The coin that I was most excited about was this coin called Nano. This was way back. Well, not way back, but in the 2017 era, and I was very much misinformed about all the altcoins. But it's funny because Nanos, uh, the value add of that coin is to be a trustless, instant settlement of currency, and you can send microtransactions also. So I think Lightning completely, substitutes Nano, and obviously having a proper money being base of Lightning instead of a shitcoin, it's just exactly the thing that I want of Lightning. So, and I'm not planning, and I'm not probably going to buy any other coin in the future. I was just unfortunately misinformed back then. But once you come to the Bitcoin side of things, it's very hard to think about buying any other coin.
Yeah. What is your most controversial or contrarian view or opinion? If nothing on Bitcoin, any subject is fine.
Well, I'm not sure if what I referred to earlier about the fees that are probably going to go up and are probably going to get too expensive for the average person to spend money on chain. I'm not sure if that counts as an unpopular opinion, but I would go with that. I think that eventually fees will get how not out of hand, but it's just a market demand for transacting on the base layer will be so much that the fees will have to go up, and it will probably be unreasonable for most people to transact on the base chain.
Yeah, I've given a little bit of thought to that, and I haven't gotten too far, but if it stands to reason that the base chain is going to be extremely valuable because of what it represents in terms of, basically etching things in stone for the whole world forever sort of thing, and also an ultimate settlement layer for all the different things that will be going on top of it, then it really seems like block space is going to be a tremendously valuable thing
Yeah.
in the future.
Yeah, block space is going to be probably the as scarce as Bitcoin itself, right? It will be very hard to get, and it will be once you got some block space, and once you got your UTXO confirmed, that will be a very valuable thing for you to have. And I'm not sure if everyone will eventually. There will be obviously protocol improvements that allow for this block space to serve more and more people, but I think it will always be something very, very valuable for you to have. And if it's that valuable, obviously the price of getting that valuable thing must go up and must be set accordingly to the value that you're getting.
Yeah. Ballpark estimate for Bitcoin's price in 5 years.
In 5 years? Well, I don't do price predictions. I'm sorry.
Okay. Do you have a morning routine? If so, what is it?
Well, I wake up, I read my email, check Bitcoin's price. If it's mostly that has been going away the longer I've been in Bitcoin, the more I disregard Bitcoin's price.
Yeah. That's
For right now,
yeah.
it's just catching up with the team since I'm in Portugal and the rest of the team is back in LA. There's a bit of a time zone difference, so it's mostly doing catch up and trying to uh, catch people up while they're still awake in the other side of the world.
Right. How do you define success?
Personally, success would be impacting at least someone's life, and I think doing Bitcoin right now is the most impactful thing that you could be doing, whether that is doing a podcast and teaching people or actually being a company working in the space and pitching other companies. I think that's the most impactful thing that you could be doing, that anyone could be doing, really. And I think success would be having that kind of impact for sure.
Most important or impactful book you've ever read?
One book that really resonated with me was Why We Sleep. I think it's by Matthew Walker or something. I'm not exactly sure, but the title is Why We Sleep. So yeah, I'm pretty sure you could find it, and it's a sleep scientist um, wrote a book about exactly why the human being or even any species sleep and the impact that lack of sleep or too much sleep has in your life. And it's very well written, and it puts sleep into perspective, and turns out to be a thing that it's actually very, very important. That everyone knows that getting sleep is important, but once you read that book, it will really put everything into perspective. So I would recommend that for everyone.
Where do you go to learn more about Bitcoin?
Usually I listen to a lot of podcasts, I read a lot of books, and I'm on Twitter more than I probably should. So those are the three things that I personally use a lot.
What is one important action that anyone can take today to up their game in your area of expertise, or something that people can be doing to improve in this space?
I think if they're not informed yet, if they don't know enough about Bitcoin, they should start with the basics. Start with maybe the Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean or the Mastering Bitcoin book. You should well, that is a little bit more technical, but if you're technically inclined, it's a great read. If you're not informed about Bitcoin, the first thing you should do is to learn about it. And once you're comfortable with it, then you certainly should own some and go buy some and store it in a cold wallet somewhere.
And is there any question you'd like to see added to this list?
Not that I can think of right now, but I for sure will let you know if something pops up in the future.
Okay, so last part is a word association. I just say a word, and you tell me the first thing that pops into your head.
Okay.
Satoshi Nakamoto.
Money,
Government.
lack of structure,
Hash rate.
finality,
The individual.
Sovereignty.
Security.
Bitcoin.
Ego.
Ego is tricky. Ego, I would say a lack of confidence.
Nice. Greed.
Demise of the human being.
Stacking sats.
The way to go.
Fiat currency.
Sell it and buy Bitcoin.
Guns.
I don't have an opinion on guns.
OpenNode.
Bitcoin payments made easy.
Altcoins.
Sell them and buy Bitcoin also.
Pizza.
I love it.
Socialism.
No opinion on that.
Family.
Gotta share us it.
Trump.
Also, no opinion on that. I'm a very non-political person. I'm
Future.
sorry. Bitcoin only, hyper-Bitcoinization.
Libra.
Probably a lot of very challenging future.
Gold.
It was good until Bitcoin came along.
And finally, of course, Bitcoin.
It's money for the regular human being.
Awesome. Rui, thank you so much for giving me the time, man. I'm sure you got lots on your plate, like I said earlier. Is there anything that you wanted to discuss or mention to anybody listening, destinations, anything like that?
Well, I'm going to be going to the Lightning Conference in Berlin later in October. So if you see me there, just come say what's up. I'm always down to talk Bitcoin and Lightning. And in general, I have to pitch OpenNode. So if you have a company and you're looking for an easy way to accept Bitcoin payments, just come talk to us. I'm sure we can work something out. And we're always looking to onboard new businesses onto the Bitcoin economy.
Awesome, man. Well, look, I really love the project. I love the work you guys are doing. I hope to actually be a OpenNode user at some point in the not too distant future.
Nice.
But good luck with all the. I know you got. I'm sure you got lots of stuff you want to do, and there's nothing but potential in this space. So good luck with all that, and speak to you maybe in 6 to 12 months and get an update from you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Okay, brother. Take care of yourself.
Bye.
See ya.
Okay.